Hello!
Hello!
Welcome to Ask a Reporter for another week.
Yes.
My name's Nathan. Matt's in the hot seat.
I was going to say that my name is Matt, but now you've taken that away from me.
His name's Matt. We checked
Matt.
it.
And I'm the reporter that you were asking questions of this week. Yay!
Yay! This week we asked you to send in your questions about famine. Very serious topic that Matt tackled this week. Matt, do you want to give us a quick synopsis of what your story was about this week so we can refresh?
So the story about famine was basically talking about the situation in South Sudan and how famine has been declared there and some of the causes of it, what's happening now, and some of the risks to other nations, because there are some serious food shortages and reasons for that, and lots of experts around the world are worried that famine could spread to other areas. So it's talking about what's happening and why, and explaining some of those issues.
You guys have sent in heaps of questions, so we'll jump into them really quickly. We do still have time for more questions, so if you want to send in a question now and you're watching us live, then just go hashtag Ask a Reporter and we'll get it, and we'll ask Matt to give us his best answer.
Yes.
And he will.
I will, yeah.
Because he's good like that.
Oh, thanks, Nathan.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with Jordan's question.
Yeah.
What was the worst famine ever recorded in history?
Look, that's a good question, but I feel like the best person to answer this question may actually be Nathan, because it was included.
Backwards.
It was included in the program this week, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, it was in China, and look, the problem is there's not a lot we know about the famine that happened there, but it was basically when they were changing over to a more communist regime, which meant that the government controlled the production of farms, and it said that a lot of the produce that came from the farms was taken away to bigger city areas, and it left a lot of people in famine. But there's a heap of resources online, and we've got some links on our website for that, so you can go to that and find out more.
Yeah, cool.
Next question from Pan. Can a really bad disease cause a famine?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of the time, really bad diseases tend to be more symptoms of famine. So when people don't get enough of the food and water they need, or enough access to healthy, hygienic things, it causes those diseases and things that are really big problems. So it's less a disease causing famine and more famine causing disease and other things that make kids especially really sick.
Okay, Gus wants to know, what are some of the other causes of famines? And what do you need to end a famine? Like, how can you make a famine better?
It's really tricky. So one of the things that we talk about in the story about famine is that famine isn't just a sudden thing. It doesn't come out of nowhere. And most of the time, it means there have been food shortages in an area for a really long time, and things get a lot worse over time. So a lot of the things happen over a period of time that can include people running from things like war, which means you have a lot of people moving in one area. You have climate problems like drought, so no rain, making it difficult for farmers to grow crops. Things like that, which make it really difficult to supply food to everyone in a given area. And those problems over time kind of get worse and worse, and with people not having access to that food for a really long time, it means they're more likely to get sick, and other things can really go wrong. So what a lot of humanitarian organizations say is that we need to do a better job around the world of stepping in earlier so this doesn't happen. So the more we give now and the more we help out and point towards things that will improve the situation, the less we'll have overall famine and fewer people will get sick and die. So.
Okay. Kai wants to know, is Australia the only country in the world that's helping to prevent famines?
Yeah. So lots of countries around the world give money. They many of them have foreign aid budgets, giving certain amounts. But what lots of aid organizations want is for governments especially to give more, but for people to give more if they can. So while lots of countries give money, a lot of people say that's not enough and we need more, and there's a lot of work to be done. So they'd like more involvement. It's not just Australia doing things, it's everyone doing things, but there's a lot more that people are saying can be done.
Okay, Zane's up next, and he wants to know, in your story, there was vision right at the very start of them doing food drops in South Sudan. Now, an important question from him, and one I hadn't thought about, how do they know the food drops won't hit people when they come down?
Look, it's a really good question,
Good question, Zane.
And one of the things that you kind of wonder around the story, because there is a bit where you can see food dropping and there's like birds flying. You're like, oh no, is it going to hit the birds? It doesn't. The birds seem fine in that bit. But I think very much so that they've chosen areas for food drops where there's open land, they can see what's happening, and people can see as the planes are coming in, they're not going to get in the way, they're not going to be hit by things, because they'll also have time from when they leave the plane to when they hit the ground. And a lot of the aid doesn't necessarily come in those ways. So food drops are one of those things where they're given to people in areas that are either difficult to access or maybe aren't that safe for aid workers themselves to be in and supply food and do proper handouts that way. So it's not a situation where food always has to be dropped in this way. This is just one way of dealing with things in certain areas. So
the other thing you have to remember too is that a lot of these food drops are repeated quite regularly too, because these communities still need food, each month or whatever. So they may have areas around certain, villages or areas that they just continually drop the food in when they do those food drops.
So people know what's going on. It's not some surprise food drop from the sky.
No. It is nice to think that there would be a community that didn't know it was coming and they go, oh yeah,
food. But,
and that'd be lovely. But yeah, I think it's organised. Ethan wants to know, what kind of foods do they drop and how do they keep it safe? How do they make sure it doesn't just bust on the ground?
Yeah, so one of the main things that in famine that is given out are little parcels that are basically like a peanut paste, and they're very high calorie, high energy content that are designed to help people as fast as possible kind of recover and hopefully avoid hospital treatment. So they drop certain things that are going to have the biggest impact at the biggest time. And also, I guess when they're dropping things, they have to be careful of making sure they're packaged in a way so they're not going to break, and they're just generally not breakable things. So you'd have like things in packets, like we talk about, like paste, so they're not going to explode everywhere necessarily.
Because if you dropped a big sack of rice, it'd just bust.
Literally millions
and waste all the
rice grains everywhere.
So there's thought that goes into it. Georgia wants to know, and I'm not sure whether we know this at this stage, but how many people are at risk of dying in South Sudan? How big is the problem?
It's a pretty big problem. I can't tell you how many people are at risk of dying, but I've read that basically around half of the population is affected in some way, and so the population is about 11 million people, I think so. Millions of people are literally affected by lack of food, and there are certain areas which are worse than other areas. So thousands of people are dying, and they're dying every day, and humanitarian organizations are trying to help, but it's a bit of a slow process, and I mean it's pretty sad. But that's the situation at the moment.
And to put that into perspective, that's nearly half of the total population of Australia. So we're talking about a lot of people here. So it's easy to picture it as a smaller country with very few people there, but half of Australia is a fair amount.
It's massive, yeah.
Lars wants to know, how do these countries actually run out of food to begin with?
Well, that is one of the things that we talk about in the story, is that there are several factors happening, and they're happening for a long period of time. So the main ones in South Sudan were war, so you have people running to escape war and fighting, and then it means you have a whole heap of people in one area, and that one area then has a lot more pressure to supply enough food and water for everyone. And the other one is drought. So when there's a long period of time without enough water, it's harder for farmers to grow crops, and some of those farmers also who have had to run from war and violence around them means there are less people to work those farms. So there are those kinds of factors really build up and make it harder to get food in the areas where people need it most.
Now, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Last week, did you travel to South Sudan to get us this footage and bring it back?
Yeah.
How did you do this story?
Look, it's a good question.
When I felt like you were here the whole week.
Look, secretly, or not so secretly actually, because I know this and I'm telling you guys, we were here. We're here the whole time. But because we're the ABC and we have people around the world, and we have organizations that companies that we pay to get their vision from people who are over there, and also we work with aid organizations who have been over there and can send us some visions. So there are different bits of vision that we get from different places that all help to tell the story. So one of the things you saw in the story is Save the Children did some filming while they were in Somalia, which is another one of those areas that is really affected by starvation. People are worried could become another place of famine. So they sent us some vision that they'd filmed over there, and we got some things from a few other sources. that all help to paint a picture of what's happening. So we as journalists on BTN don't get to go to all of these places. We're based here, but we have access to people in different parts of the world who can share their vision and their stories with us, which makes our job a lot easier.
Yeah, and we should thank those aid organisations too, because without them it's very hard to tell the story, and they take time out of their very busy schedules over there to
Absolutely.
help you guys understand what's happening there,
Yeah.
so that hopefully you guys can help out in a small way back here in Australia too. So thank you very much to them. Brianna wants to know, how common is famine around the world? Do famines happen all the time, or is this a fairly big deal?
So the last famine was 6 years ago, as officially declared by the UN. But while famine itself, because it has a few different circumstances in which the UN decides that famine is declared in a certain area, famine itself doesn't necessarily happen all the time. It is always a problem in lots of parts of the world of food shortages and not having access to food over a long period of time. So there are lots of places where people are starving, they don't have everything they need, but it's not always called a famine. So just because you don't hear about it all the time, it doesn't mean it's not a problem, and there are lots of countries who need help and are at risk of running out of food or getting access to what they need.
Now, Ethan C has asked a question that I relate to as well.
Yes.
Because when I was young, my mum always used to say, if you don't finish your dinner, then we'll have to send it overseas to people who actually, need it. And, i.e. you should finish your dinner because you're wasting
Why won't you eat this if kids are starving? Basically.
Exactly. So Ethan C has asked...
Bit of a guilt trip from parents.
Massive guilt trip. If let us know if your parents have done the same thing.
Yeah.
So Ethan C has asked, are those good food leftovers from Australia ever sent to people suffering famine overseas?
Look, they're not, and obviously there are quite a few reasons for that, but I guess one of the main ones is that a lot of the food that we eat at night doesn't keep that well in order to then send it somewhere that's going to take days or hours, and has to be packaged, has to be handled, has to be thrown into a plane and thrown out of a plane again, packed and unpacked, possibly refrigerated. Probably
Take my peas.
It could just it could be just 6 mushy peas that you've dropped on the floor, and then your dog stood in, but then your
peas
mum
are bad enough as it is.
Plate. I don't know. I don't want to judge, but basically leftovers aren't really a solution. It would be cool if it were, and you could share your extra food with people, but no, it's really tricky, and there is actually a bigger issue with this as well, because one of the things we hear about all the time with famine and food shortages is food drops and people delivering food to areas that need it most. But one thing that lots of aid organisations are saying now is that people are actually better off being given money or vouchers that they can use to buy food in those areas, because then that creates more opportunity to get food and less time and money spent in getting that food over there and getting it to the people who need it. Because in the meantime, when that's all happening, lots of people can die, they can get sicker, and there's a whole heap of money that has to be spent just in getting that food there. So if that money is used to give people who are on the ground access to food, that in some ways could be a much better option. So that's something that's being looked at now.
Ethan J wants to know, why do we drop food to people rather than deliver it in other ways? Now, you touched on that before, didn't you?
Yeah, so food drops are done in situations where people are difficult to access for a few different reasons. They might be in a spot that's isolated and hard to reach. They might be done because it's dangerous for people to be on the ground and deliver it themselves or unpack it for whatever reason. So it's a safety thing, it's an access thing. There are a few different reasons, and it's not necessarily indicative of the whole situation of delivering food. That's just one way that people are receiving food in that area.
Now, Isaiah wants to know, why can't South Sudan, okay, so they've got a problem with famine right now. Why can't they send all of their civilians somewhere with a low population and lots of resources like Australia? Can you just pick up a population and take them to another country? It seems like a great idea.
Yeah, it would be good in some ways if the world were only that simple. If people in need, if we could move them. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, and there are lots of reasons for it. How do you get so many people from one area to another? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to help those people out? What can other countries do? It's not as simple as picking up people and moving them, because then even if you move them there, even if they get all the help they need, then they need somewhere to live, they need jobs, they need things to do. So it's such a complex thing. that it's not really possible. So a lot of the time it's about finding ways to help people where they're living already and give them other access to things in the future. So relief that's going to help them now, and planning things in the future that could potentially help them, whether that means farming or setting up other jobs or access to things that will help them.
Now, Nora wants to know, can we ever truly stop famine? Is it possible for everyone in the world to have something to eat for every meal?
Look, I definitely think it is, and if you hear anything from aid organisations and other people who care about this, they'll say, yes, it's entirely possible, we've got enough food. It's just about getting access to those people and finding ways to help them in those areas. So yes, it's possible. I think it's going to take a huge effort and lots of money and lots of people from richer countries like Australia to help out in ways that they can. But it probably needs, on a larger scale, government intervention from multiple countries and for people to work really hard to erase it. But I think it's definitely possible. It just could take some time and a lot of effort.
You touched on a few of these earlier too, but Cody wants to know, other than dropping food to people, how else can we make food and water more accessible for people in these areas?
So I think one of the things that people are trying to do is setting up long-term solutions. So things like setting up farms or teaching people about hygiene, things that are going to prevent sickness, setting up long-term solutions like building wells or giving access to animals or other ways to grow things in certain situations that maybe are going to be more drought resistant. So setting up things that are long term that are going to help people, as well as the immediate stuff of giving them food and giving them medical supplies and things just to get through now. So long term things that are going to help lots of people over a long period of time.
Nicholas wants to know, do you think enough money could be raised to help everyone?
Yeah.
And we sort of talked about that before, about stamping it out, but there is enough money out there, isn't there?
I think enough money could definitely be raised to help everyone, but it has to be used in a way that you can help the most people and is going to be effective. So yes, I think it would take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money from people in different areas working in different ways, but it's definitely possible, I think.
St. Joseph's from Hawthorne have joined us, and they've just sent in some questions about mainly how long do they expect the famine might last?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I don't know when this famine is going to end, but I think it's going to take a lot more time to, even if you can officially end famine, to end food shortages in general and to stop people from starving and to make sure they have access to food in the future. I think that's going to be a much longer term thing rather than just eradicating the idea of famine in certain areas. So having food security is a really big one, not just for South Sudan but other countries in the area. So
St. Joseph's also want to know, how are babies brought up in a famine? Because we know babies need access to food really regularly. It's very important for their growth and well-being. What happens in a famine?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really tough one, and a lot of the time, unfortunately, it is really young kids who are the ones most susceptible because they're growing at a fast rate. They need a lot and they need to eat regularly, so they're the ones who are often most affected, which is obviously really sad. So it's tricky for them, and they often need a lot of medical intervention to kind of help them get better, but access to that is obviously really tricky right now.
St. Joseph's also want to know, apart from food, is there anything else dropped out of the planes? Do they give other equipment? Or?
Yeah, so obviously food and things that are going to give people the nutrition they need, really important. I'm not sure about other specific things, but probably things that are going to give you access to clean water, either if that's something they add to water, or medical supplies, or people, or access to those medical supplies and people who can help them, I guess. So in food drops themselves, probably there's less of that. In other areas where aid organizations are helping, that have doctors and medical staff who can administer those kinds of things.
And St. Joseph's also want to know, can it be dangerous to fly into these areas? In your story, you did mention that one of the big causes of the famine in South Sudan is war. So can flying in be dangerous, or can driving in be dangerous? If you're trying to drive
so there's definitely issues with that, which is one of the reasons we talk about food drops being important, because there's less risk of things happening to people who are trying to help on the ground. So food drops is one of those ways, but it is a real risk even for people who are on the ground in areas that you might think are safer, just because there are so many people moving around and there has been war there for a long time. It's not always totally secure, and that's one of the difficult things making it harder for lots of aid workers there right now.
That's all the time we have for questions for today. However, I quickly want to get Matt to talk about his story for this week, because it's a lovely, lovely story that you shouldn't miss. Matt, your story for this week?
Yeah, so we're doing a story this week about epilepsy for Purple Day, which is about raising awareness for people living with epilepsy. So I met a boy called Archer. He's 10 years old. He's really cool. He's really fun. We have heaps of things in common. He likes basketball. I like basketball.
Does he like donuts?
He likes Star Wars. I think Star Wars is pretty good. I haven't seen the latest movie though. He has, so he knows all about it. But he's a really cool guy. But he's living with epilepsy and he has lots of seizures, and they make his life really hard. But it's very much him telling you about what life for him is like, and just sharing the message that he's a normal kid just like any of you guys. So it's really, I think it's be a really cool story, and you guys will enjoy it. So tune in for that one.
And that story is coming up for Purple Day, which is what date? Do you know?
It's the 26th of March, which I believe is a Sunday, actually.
Sunday. So if any of you guys would like to get behind the Purple Day thing, raise money for epilepsy, then you've still got a couple of weeks to organise it, and definitely watch Matt's story next week about that, which will be fantastic. Next week on Ask a Reporter, we're going to be tackling the Queensland drought. Nearly 90% of Queensland is in drought right now, so Amelia will be in the hot seat next week, and she'll be answering your questions. It will not be Matt.
Yes.
You look not at all the same, and a little bit different. And she'll be answering all your questions about the Queensland drought. She's been talking to kids right throughout Queensland, throughout all of the drought declared areas throughout regional Queensland, and so she's going to bring you that story next week, and you can ask her all of your questions in Ask a Reporter next Friday. So thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next week for more Ask a Reporter. See ya. Bye. Bye.